Hi, this is Meat and Poison with me, Andy.
And me, Matt. And today we are talking about a great American writer, Mr. Ernest Hemingway.
We are.
Who would have been 121 today had he lived. He was born
21st of July.
He was born just at the very end of the last century, of century before last, of 1899 he was born, and sadly decided to leave us of his own accord in 1962.
Yeah.
But nonetheless,
I'm not going to dwell on that too much.
No. Nonetheless, definitely left his mark, I would say.
Absolutely.
Famous man, really, I think, for being a manly man and a heavy drinker. And Andy's going to explain quickly why we're drinking what we are.
Yeah, we are drinking San Pellegrino, and we just found out, when we were doing our research, obviously, we found out that the water was established in 1899. And this was a very symbolic trip in Ernest Hemingway's well-traveled life, I think, as he traveled as a correspondent
to Italy, you mean?
To Italy, yeah.
You didn't say Italy.
I didn't, but it's Italian mineral water.
It is.
Yeah. So we've decided also that we're not going to drink heavily, like Ernest did.
Yeah, as we didn't want to celebrate his alcoholism, as it is part of the reason.
Yes,
I think that
definitely
sort of destroyed him towards the end. So we thought we'd stick on soft drinks today, contrary to what we said last week.
Yeah, we just decided that we'd bring some of the touch of the 19th, come early 20th century. Italian. He fell in love with an Italian woman who he married. That was his first wife.
He fell in love with an English nurse whilst he was convalescing in Milan.
Yeah, so listen, if you remember in the Frida episode, we kind of announced that we were going to do an Ernest Hemingway episode, and that neither of us had a firm enough opinion about him, and that we were sort of expecting it to be formed or changed. Has your opinion changed?
Yeah, definitely. I've really loved researching this one. It's been really nice, and I like the other ones, but it's been a particular pleasure because I've learned loads about him. I had this opinion of him as kind of a real bully, a very unpleasant man, possibly a wife beater, all of these sorts of things.
Was that a thing?
I don't know, that was in my head, and I found very little evidence to support it.
His wife beating.
I haven't done years of research, so please feel free to correct me if there is a lot of evidence to support it. But in the limited sort of time I've had, didn't find any evidence to support that, which was really a nice surprise. And actually my opinion of him has changed from this guy's really an unpleasant bully and there's not much to redeem him, to he's actually quite a heroic and tragic character. Absolutely heroic in terms of he decides, he takes himself off to the First World War, even though his sight's too bad to be in the army, so he then goes and drives an ambulance. Horrendous injuries very shortly after he arrives, which he survives, luckily. Lots of heartbreak. He then joins the Spanish Civil War. So he's a heroic chap. He's also writing what I find personally great literature. A lot of the ones I've read, I've really enjoyed, and really pleasantly.
And led an adventurous life.
An adventurous guy
throughout his life, because it wasn't just the pursuits of, in terms of his journalism and how he wanted to be a hero and he wanted to live with a purpose, but also bullfighting, fishing, and all these manly sort of pursuits. He wanted to be in,
although I think weird.
out and about, and he wasn't like a sit-at-home kind of guy who...
No, absolutely not. I don't think...
And
I
drank
don't
a
think
lot, but also was really productive.
Yeah, hugely productive.
If you look back at his career.
But then he must have been writing drunk a large amount of
Yeah,
time.
of
Because
course.
there's no way anyone could have produced the volume of literature that he did and drink the way that he did, which is definitely very much supported by all of the research that I've done, that he was drinking from a really early age. I think possibly...
Probably not editing, but drinking the first draft.
I think...
Writing the first draft, sorry. This is really mineral water, if you don't believe this. I think we found out that in the course of our research that Ernest was an expat for a great deal of his life.
Something I liked about him a lot. This guy is a definite global citizen.
Yeah.
He's lived in France, lived in Spain. As we said, he went to the Civil War. Well, that was because he was convalescing there. Really.
Yeah, but still, he went there. He went there on a journalistic mission.
Oh, to Italy.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
This is why he ended up in the hospital there.
Oh, I thought that was a different time. I thought he got moved to Milan to convalesce.
No, and he went a lot to even Rhineland, where we are, to the Ruhr on journalistic missions. And then he moved to Cuba Cologne, as well. Cuba.
He was
very well travelled, and kind of I think we bonded.
I think anyone that is open to different cultures, to exploring living in different places, is always someone of interest to me.
Something definitely we both feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
I think that the fact that he travelled so much and lived also, not just travelled, but kind of lived in and learned these places.
Yeah, he certainly didn't kind of just come and go. He stayed for a while.
And also, we talked about it when we first started discussing Hemingway. If you remember, you said, well, most of his books are actually happening elsewhere, not in America. He's not, to me, even an American writer. So even his work kind of speaks for his
It's very true for a great American writer. Very little of his work is based in the States.
Surprising. Where does the Sun Also Rises take place?
In Paris and Spain. And
so,
then,
For Whom the Bell Tolls, I think it's the worst war in Spain.
Yeah.
And even A Movable Feast.
It's Paris, The Old Man and the Sea is in Cuba. Yeah, actually there's very few I can think of. I don't know, I've never read any of his short stories, which I think I will do. Definitely from the back of this, I definitely want to read more of his.
Definitely an interesting point. Definitely an interesting point about him, so true expat.
Yeah, and I think definitely informs his writing in that you get these, the characters, the foreign characters are probably better developed than someone who might not have experienced their culture. For example, the bullfighter in The Sun Also Rises. Yeah. They're not just caricatures or stereotypes. They are based on a deeper knowledge of culture.
Agree. I decided that I was going to concentrate on him as a writer. It's a much more interesting aspect of his life. And I've managed to, my opinion has changed, because I was going to be a bit slightly, maybe even more than slightly more negative than I am going to be. But also, and I've discovered something.
In terms of his writing as well?
In terms of his writing.
Because you found new things that you enjoy.
Found new things, but also kind of went back there and analysed this with a much more mature mind now, and looked at it more. I looked at the details of his writing, some of the things that I never looked at seriously, and maybe trusted somebody else's opinion instead of mine.
So your experiences of him were when you were younger?
Yeah, when I started, I mean, when I first read Hemingway, I think I was, I don't want to lie, 18 or 19, and it wasn't, in my opinion, his greatest book, although probably his most awarded book, The Old Man and the Sea. We're going to talk about it in a few minutes. But I definitely, in terms of my meat, I will say I may not like him as a writer. One of his books I've discovered that I really like, but he doesn't seem pretentious in any of his words. He's very true to his voice, to his style. There are no inessentials in his books. There are no sort of verbosity, no embellishments, no sentimentality. I appreciate that. I have a lot of respect for that.
Yeah,
as a writer, I prefer that to, say, Victor Hugo.
Are we going on to bashing the great French writers again? Let's not go down that route again.
I'd rather read The Mailman and the Sea again.
I'm just going to say there's a hell of a lot of Russian writers out there that I think could get...
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about.
Mm.
And then my poison, if I may.
Yeah.
It's probably... You know, when you... Even in the book, I'm not going to say the name yet, but even in the book I was reading recently, some of the manly pursuits, I just can't care about this enough. You know, there's a lot of sort of macho about him, not bully, but kind of being a macho. I don't know if you know that story, we've probably heard the same thing. When Fitzgerald helped him with his The Sun Also Rises, and he put like a note in at the beginning on the first page saying, the sun also rises, and then underneath, like your cock, if you still have one, a great Gatsby, written with the friendship of F.S. Fitzgerald. I'm just not interested in that.
Certainly not like a delicate couth man. I wouldn't say
no. And I'm just in these like manly competition. I
don't know, but one thing that I have developed a hypothesis. I have a theory about this idea of manliness around him, that I think the first... when he was contemporary, when he was writing in his own times, what was assumed to be manliness.
Opposed to when he wasn't writing in his own times?
No, I said, but I mean when people were receiving were consuming his work for the first time, so his contemporaries. They were analysing it and taking these things to mean manliness. But I think his obsession is less with manliness and it's actually strength. And nowadays, we separate the two, whereas, you know, in 1940, 1950, people would have been like, oh, well, it's a strong person, it's a manly person. I think actually his interest is not in manliness, his interest is in strength, because at a very young age, a lot of his is taken away from him, from this horrible injuries that he got during the First World War. And when we get to the end of his life and we see The Old Man and the Sea again, and this is really just a battle of strength, of wills, of physical strength, and that's at a time in his life when he's really almost lost all of his control over his own body and power. And I think it's been interpreted that these characters are all about manliness, but I don't think they are, because I think they're about strength. I think that's his obsession. And I think he's kind of unfairly tarnished as maybe misogynistic in that terms, but actually...
Well, see, I've never heard about his women hating.
Well, I don't think... Okay, maybe misogynistic is not the right word. What I mean is this obsession with manliness.
I'm translating for some of the listeners.
This obsession with manliness over being better than feminineness or femininity, and I don't think that's what he means. I think what he doesn't like, or really has no time for, is weakness. Which doesn't necessarily make him a great person.
Again,
because I think
not on board with that either.
But he venerates the character, for example, in Sun Also Rises. Lady Ashley is a strong woman. Yeah, she's making tough mental decisions, and being honest with herself.
He's not against a protagonist being a woman.
Yeah. And he doesn't just kind of be like, oh, and she was just a woman in the room. Like, he builds...
It's very 19th century. Well. A lot of 19th century literature's protagonists are women.
Oh, with things like Tessa the D'Urbervilles and Far From the Madding Crowd. Is that Bathsheba?
Yeah, but I mean, Thackeray and Anna Karenina and lots of other great books.
We're not going to get into Anna Karenina right now.
Let's do it.
We need like a 4-hour podcast.
And we've tricked you. This is actually a 2-hour episode.
I'll talk about Anna Karenina in 20 years when I've had time to read it.
All right, so we're going to talk about your favorite book in a second, but did you know the funny fact that his first fiction published wasn't actually a novel, it was a collection of short stories called In Our Time. a radio program
from
on
the Radio 4
4 by Melvin Bragg
I didn't
that I'm
get that when you-
obsessed with. If there's any one takeaway, if you want to tune into this episode and never tune in again, that's fine with me as long as you listen to In Our Time by Melvin Bragg on Radio 4. And here's my, I am not a paid spokesperson. I wish I were.
Slightly obsessed.
Right, but the first novel published was The Sun Also Rises. Tell us about why you like it so much. What's so special about that bloody book?
I find his style very... You're not a fan. I find his style very interesting, and it's a very soothing style to be... It's easy to read, which I know sounds really kind of reductive, but
That's what it boils down to.
It's something you can get into quite quickly and
Next year
enjoy.
I will tell
The
you
plot
about
moves
the
along.
tirade this man gave me after he finally finished Lolita.
What? Because
Okay, don't.
I'm not a fan of an author, no, and this relates to Hemingway. I'm not a fan of an author who deliberately makes their books difficult to get through.
I can't wait for
Which
that
just-
episode.
And Hemingway does not do that. Hemingway is very accessible from an adolescent age upwards.
For anybody who
And he
has
also-
200 words in their vocabulary.
You disagree, but I think he's economical with his language in a way which brings a simple beauty to things. And also, The Sun Also Rises is set at the beginning in Paris, and I think I read it about the time I was living there, and it was a joy because he really paints a wonderful picture of Paris and the kind of loose, because I think it's in between the wars, and this kind of loose gay feeling, I think, is what they
used to call it.
Yeah.
Meaning
I don't know what else to...
happy,
Yeah. I don't know how else to describe it, really.
joyful.
This kind of almost end of days Paris that's just enjoying life day by day.
Cheerful, maybe.
And he's, just this group of gadabout drunks, really.
Yeah.
That are enjoying the spoils of Paris. And there's some wonderful descriptions in it. There's a bit which always reminds me of a friend of mine who will remain nameless, but he describes Lady...
We like to name names and then delete them.
He describes Lady Ashley coming into her room when they've travelled to Spain, and he said she can make a mess that could only be made by someone who grew up with staff. And immediately, without describing any of the room, you have this picture of disarray. And I think he's so clever in doing that. In just a very short sentence, you've already got a whole picture of the room.
Do you know what? There's just one thing. You said that I disagreed with the economical style, because in my memory, and I used to, I think, do Hemingway at uni, and I think I even remember one of his texts was at my final examination, and I remember just hating that bit because it's just not what I wanted to deal with, because I wanted to shine and to show that how I love that literature.
From a language point of view.
From a language point of view, I think I don't remember what it was, but it just for the life of me. But it was like, why don't you give me at least an author I love? But anyway. And I disagree with the one notion that's very popular about him, is that he writes in short sentences and doesn't use a lot of adjectives and adverbs. I was reading very, very specifically looking for those, and they were every second or third line. His sentences are very long and clunky.
I disagree.
His style is a lot of ends, hardly any commas, and a vocabulary of an intermediate learner.
There are a lot of ands, I would say, but he uses a lot of short...
He's got a unique style. He's not copying anyone. He's very unique.
It's quite staccato, I think.
But it's
it might
not
be
short sentences. I mean, it's not a Tolstoy
no, but it's kind
long
of short,
sentence.
It's short clauses then.
Yeah, obviously he doesn't know what a...
He's not, he's not Dickens or whatever and spending 15 minutes to describe a blade of grass. It's kind of like...
Yeah.
A wet
I'm
blade.
not saying it's right or wrong. He's got his particular style. It's fine. I mean, he's got... I think his career stands for itself. But
I'm sure he'd be pleased.
I'm just saying that why it's probably not particularly my style, but also it's kind of wrongly described. If it's not really short sentences and no adjectives, he uses very simple adjectives. He wouldn't use like long-winded words of 4, 5, 6 syllables.
That's what it means. I mean, you get the feeling of this.
If you look at the text, you immediately see it. It's very lucid. I think that's kind of my take on it.
But like, for example, there's a beautiful quote, and this also ties into my feeling that his manliness is, or this opinion of him as this kind of gruff manly, it's not necessarily true, because he writes about love so beautifully. And I used a quote from him in the best man speech I did at my brother's wedding.
From Whom the Bell Tolls.
From Whom the Bell Tolls. And he writes, what you have is the most important thing that can happen to a human being. There will always be people who say it does not exist because they cannot have it. But I tell you now that it is true, and that you have it, and that you are lucky. So I agree with you that it is true, and that you have it, and that you are lucky is a long sentence, but it feels short. And I think that's what people are saying about him, that he's getting to the point quite quickly.
That was a beautiful one. Shall we talk about the most questionable book of all times?
Do you mean the most questionable Nobel Prize winning book
Yes.
of all times? So we're talking about The Old Man and the Sea, which is
Very old.
His very last novel, or
no
one of.
Ooh.
It's right at the end.
You know what's unfair about that? He wrote it in the course of 8 weeks.
Yeah. Okay.
People, if anybody knew that winning a Nobel Prize for anything was possible, much less literature, in the course of 8 weeks, people would be literally setting their lives on that mission.
But I think what you mentioned earlier, before we talk about the book, is interesting, that the Nobel Prize was specifically given for that book and not for his collection of works.
I am pissed
which is
off
not
about.
that usual.
I don't want to say, I don't know the statistics, but it's often people get,
Just
I think
as
more
an
often
author,
people get
and I wonder why that
Nobel
was
Prize
chosen.
for the
Is it
complete
because
works.
there was also a lot of stuff they considered not worthy of their...
Do you think that it was just like a dry year?
Like, oh, that one.
No one's written anything.
Maud, what have you got? Oh, well, yeah,
Oh,
all
I
right.
would believe you. If that's the case, I am on board. It's probably the best book
were
of
just like-
1953 and 1954. When was that?
No, I just wonder, is it a bit of a slap in the face that they were like, hey, you've won the Nobel Prize? No, not for the other books, just that one.
Was he? What was the speech about? Was he?
Was he
grateful?
Well, in his speeches where he says that as writers become more popular, they get worse, and that as they grow in notoriety and whatever, their talent deteriorates, and their attention to detail deteriorates, because they become something else, because they become celebrities. I think is what he's trying to say.
So he was basically trying to tell the world that he is too famous to
He was definitely
write well.
grateful. I mean, he was more grateful than bloody Bob Dylan not turning up.
All right. Well, apparently you liked it, right?
Old Man and the Sea. Yes, I did. I very much enjoyed it. I read it first.
That's his meat.
It's the first ever book I read of his. First ever book I read. No, first.
The only one.
First Hemingway I read, and I was 19 in Cuba.
Oh, me
so
too. Wasn't in Cuba.
Was very apt, and I have to say, when I first started it, I very stupidly thought, I was like, oh, this guy maybe wrote this in a different language first and has been badly translated into English, because I was very confused that this massively famous book was written in this really bizarre, to me at the time, style. It wasn't lyrical, it wasn't really flowing, it's very...
Doesn't it happen to you sometimes?
Short
with other
sentences?
Writers?
Where I think...
Just sometimes?
What?
That you think, how did it get through the editor?
How did this get that? Yeah, it does sometimes. But particularly for Hemingway, I hadn't expected it, and then I actually grew to really love it. I found it a really enjoyable style to read. I think it's a great story. It's very short, so which is always I'm always a fan of a short book that I can read quickly.
It's very Nobel Prize worthy.
But you.
Hated it.
Absolutely
Strong. Hated it.
Strong.
No, I was reading with open eyes, and I think my jaw, back in the day there was no Uber, but if I was reading it now, my jaw would have got into an Uber and they got home. Because I was so perplexed by how...
That it wasn't good.
I just couldn't see one bit why this. I actually found it a little bit pretentious back in the day, but I don't want to.
But the style or the content?
No, just the content, just like how kind of brutally honest and earnest, and I guess Ernest is the name, and serious he was about every single line. I'm like, give me a joke.
That's what I mean. I mean, it's meaty writing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not give me a joke. Is that what you?
Well,
I mean, we're coming. Well, okay.
There's a lot of humor in the book.
Okay, there is quite a lot of humor in the book. If you can understand what the bloody hell he's talking about.
Okay, moving on. Moving on. Let's keep the train moving.
What is your? You do have a book you enjoy.
Listen, I was a hater, but now I'm not. I've discovered a book called A Movable Feast.
Yeah.
And it's his latest. It's not fiction, but reads like fiction. It's his very entertaining memoir of his years in Paris.
I mean, I think some people in it would rather say it was fiction, wouldn't they?
Would rather, yeah.
He's not very nice about. Who's he not very nice? Germaine Greer, is it?
Who?
No, not Germaine Greer.
Is this some random name? No, what about that writer?
Not Germaine Greer, oh my god, she's really fun.
Not Gertrude Stein?
Gertrude Stein is who I'm trying to say.
He's actually okay about her. He's not nice about her.
Germaine Greer, I'm just imagining Germaine Greer in Paris with all of these
I thought you
people.
were like losing it. No, it's a very entertaining book. It reads like fiction, very evocative. I think that he is, if nothing else, he's great at evoking places, sites, memorabilia, streets. You're reading some of it just a little bit too much because he literally names every street he goes to. And because I've never lived in Paris, to me, it's not Greek, but it's just, I don't see what's happening. So to me, just a little bit too much because, I know another writer whom I absolutely adore, who names the streets, but it's just not too much because he will name 4 streets in the course of a line.
But I think that's because A Movable Feast is a work of non-fiction.
Yes.
So he's not trying to draw you into a world that he's creating. He's trying to place things factually where they are.
But again, it's kind of in the middle of things because it doesn't read like a journal or anything because the dialogues are very, they're edited and you can tell that he's working on characters here.
Do you think this is the first example of edited reality? Is Hemingway a forebearer to like The Hills and Made in Chelsea?
But I definitely enjoyed that book a lot. And I've got a quote from it, which will lead us nicely to our next topic.
Sure.
And I have a question for you, which I hope that you've had enough time to think about. So it starts with a quote. If you are lucky enough to have lived in Paris as a young man, then wherever you go for the rest of your life, it stays with you, for Paris is a movable feast. And if I know anything about you, is that you lived in Paris as a young man.
Yes.
So,
I mean,
what, go on.
Younger than now, if you can believe.
Is that possible?
I did. I lived in Paris for a year, a bit more than a year, I think, when I was 21. Paris has been a lifelong love of mine. I was lucky enough to be taken there a lot when I was younger, but my parents also loved the city, and living there was an absolute dream. I found it just to be the most perfect city. For me, it's the most perfect size of a city. You can walk one side to the other in the course of a day, and it's like a collection of villages. Well, when I was living there, I lived there 13 years ago, so maybe it's a bit different, but for me, you have all these wonderful arrondissements.
Oh, around Hemingway's age.
I was 21 when I lived there. I mean, Hemingway lived there a lot, didn't he?
Yeah, but he moved there when he was 18, 19, so around that age.
Maybe. I totally agree with him. It does stay with you, but it had always been a love of mine. But I mean, his Paris, I think, is an interesting thing. Like this cultural.
Not mine, Hemingway's. I have
Yes.
no Paris of my own.
Hemingway's Paris with Fitzgerald there, with not Germaine Greer, Gertrude Stein,
Yeah.
with all of these artists and this cultural soup that's going on there, and all of these people have moved there. And the best thing is that when I was researching this, the reason Hemingway moved there was because it was cheap, and you think, God, I wish nowadays that was the case. And we were talking, weren't we, about
Cultural.
where has that occurred again in history? These cultural hubs where you get this collection of artists creating huge amounts of famous work.
Yeah, we were talking about that, and obviously in the 20s it was Paris. I think in the 30s it was Berlin a little bit, parts of it, I think pre-war Berlin, and then it moved slowly to London, I guess.
I think London in the 60s, you can look at like King's Road.
In the 70s, you can give London just a little bit more.
Yeah.
There was a lot of...
Well, everybody says that. That's like famous, isn't it? Anybody that knows, that experience knows that the 60s actually happened in the 70s.
Thinking of sort of Sex Pistols and some of the
I think
great...
and Mary Quant, and Bieber and stuff like that. From a fashion point of view, that's all happening late 60s, early 70s. And then...
Not Justin Bieber.
Not Justin Bieber.
Don't be alarmed.
I think maybe it's
this episode is not in the making.
And then New York.
Then New York
end of the 70s with Studio 54 with the Chelsea Hotel, even earlier, I think. How do they happen? It's such a weird phenomenon that these, like, does everybody just get a message? It's like, guys, we're going to New York now.
Well, I'm actually, because you had an assumption that it was about accommodation prices, and it may as well be that, but also it has to be an attractive place. It has to be an internationally attractive place for people. So it can't just be, property prices. Obviously, there are.
Well, I came on that because I think now this could never happen in Paris now, because no impoverished writer could live anywhere near the centre of Paris. But you were saying that possibly maybe the new version of the cultural hubs are tech hubs.
The tech hubs. Because I was thinking, Paris is now obviously the startup, together with Berlin, but I think in Paris is just a little bit more because of the concentration of money. The startup hub, so the technological hub, and we have the Silicon Valley, which are today's reflections on where the world is thinking, where the world is going, because it just wasn't in the 20s. It just wasn't.
But it's not art.
It's not. I'm not saying it's cultural hubs. I'm just saying that it kind of maybe something that's moving the world that is much more on the agenda today than, say, writing and talking about inspirational stuff and how to paint and what new styles. I think that artists are much more even isolated today, and they create in their own environments, and then they meet up at exhibitions.
Because people are pushed out of towns in these hubs because of rents and stuff. There's a
different kind of expectation of what living standards are. I think that everybody wants to make money today as an artist.
These people also, artists maybe need other artists around them to feed off and to
absolutely
and to inspire and to keep people going. And I think there seem to be less and less places in Europe that are able to offer that, where you've got a city with enough life going on to draw inspiration from, and where people can live together.
We've come to a conclusion about a cultural hub today, because we've kind of touched upon Germany, and we think it may be Berlin today.
Yeah,
because it's an affordable big city. It's not Paris in the 20s. I don't think the Picassos and Hemingways and Joyces and Fitzgeralds are living in Berlin. I may be wrong, and I hope I am. I just don't know enough about that. But a lot of the people, that we kind of know,
anyone that I knew, sort of
the
in
cultural
terms of
scene even of London, have moved.
Fashion, a lot of people moved there a few years ago.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's becoming if it's almost past its moment now.
Because it's being gentrified like this tomorrow.
Because before I left London, there was sort of an area of London, Dalston, and that was really becoming the place where everyone moved because other parts of East London were too expensive. Now that's already past it because already people saw it and like the rents went up. Berlin actually brought in its own new laws, I think, to protect renters again, to stop that happening. But there are definitely areas of Berlin that I think 5-6 years ago were super trendy and now are kind of gentrified, and the hardcore
I was
cool kid artists
some
have
point
already
in
moved
my
on.
life moving to Berlin, and I had 6 full months, and trust me, I was trying pretty regularly, but it wasn't, it was slim pickings.
Yeah.
Really, really slim pickings. And I could pay not a student's.
So do you think
loan.
Hemingway would have been in Berlin instead of Paris? Would Hemingway of Gatsby have been?
I think he would have been
Gatsby.
anywhere to Gatsby.
Do you think Hemingway and
instead of a fictional
Fitzgerald
character? I think he would be anywhere where the inspiration
where the
would
booze
take
was.
him, where the cheap booze was.
So
I think it's not. I mean, Paris is not too shabby to be, because even.
No, I'm not saying that.
I'm just saying. No, I'm just saying that he also loved the food and the atmosphere and everything. Berlin is also very, very special. You have to love the shabby chic. You have to love the weather there.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, I think even as a pauper in Paris. But I don't think he necessarily cared about that. Because,
No,
it's so interesting. I think maybe he would have gone to Berlin. I don't think the Fitzgeralds would have been there. Because
they were
I love
they were pushy.
the difference in their
Were
style. They didn't have any money left, but yes, they liked the finer things. But I find it so weird, because Hemingway's Champagne, indeed. Hemingway is counted in the jazz age authors, but I don't think I would characterize any of his writing as.
Just imagining Fitzgerald in a German Kneipe with a Stein drinking
and a tailcoat on. Yeah, I don't think it would have. No, I don't think they would have gone down there. I think Hemingway would have been well up for it. To be honest. He'd be
he was
member of the local shooting
enough.
club and hunting boar in the Black Forest or whatever. I'm aware is nowhere near Berlin. Do you have some recommendations?
Yeah, we have to.
Hemingway and perhaps Berlin. You know Berlin very well.
Yeah, I'm a great lover of Berlin. If you have Paris, I have just a tiny bit of Berlin.
Okay. Well, shall I start then?
Yeah, you can we're going to wrap up on recommendations as usual.
Yeah. I mean, for Hemingway, I definitely. I've only read a handful of his books. I think for me, if you want to start somewhere, I'd start at the end. Old Man and the Sea, where I did.
Not right at the end.
Well, okay, near the end. His style's already quite developed and quite strong there, and so I think you'd know quite quickly if it's a style you're going to get along with, and if you would enjoy some of his other longer books. Because The Old Man and the Sea, you can get through in a weekend really, and it's worth it. Well, the Nobel Committee thought so.
But what about your recommendation?
Oh, for Paris, yes.
Yeah,
I was going to suggest something for Paris because it's very prevalent in a lot of his work. Would be Canal St Martin and that area, which is in the 10th arrondissement. It's just a little bit outside of the Marais and Bastille, where a lot of tourists are. So it's kind of a little bit more local, but it's still. It's such a wonderful area. It's the canal there, and there's one particular. If you want somewhere to start, I would suggest Hotel du Nord. Is directly by the the canal.
Are you a paid spokesperson?
No, I've had many a fun afternoon there, and then from there you can explore. There's a great pizzeria near to the canal where you can they give you a balloon and you go and sit on the canal and they bring your pizza to you, and it's super cute. I don't know if that place is still open. That was going 10 years ago, but
that was 13 years ago.
I'm still waiting with my balloon.
The balloon is still there.
What about you?
Well, I'm definitely going to recommend A Movable Feast. This is something that I've discovered through my research, and I really loved it. And it's a very, very evocative memoir. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I think it's maybe one of his books that I might like.
Might like.
Well, as in, I would go back to it. I would definitely go, because I like going back to books, and it's one of the ones I definitely didn't put it down. And then for Berlin, it would be Berlin is tricky because there's no particular cafe or bar or street that I like to go back to. There are so many places that I've been to that I like to revisit. There's this one spot in Berlin called Tempelhof Park, which was built as an airport to perform that function, which it didn't end up performing, but it completely stayed there. So the airport is there, all the runways are there, but it's become a huge park for people to enjoy themselves.
What is it with Berlin and airports?
Yeah,
why can they never get one
that's true,
just sorted out?
It's quite bitter, but this one is truly beautiful. And you know, if you ever there and the sun is shining and it's good weather, go there. Definitely go there. You will have the time of your life. It's truly beautiful, and you can walk there nearly the whole day. It's a huge place.
And we'll put the address.
We'll put the recommendations in the description below. And next time we talk about.
We're doing Yves Saint Laurent.
The episode is on the 1st of August.
1st of August is the next one. We're going to talk a little bit about his life in Morocco from an expat point of view. Well, he wasn't an expat there really, but his legacy to the fashion industry, his work, his inspirations, his collaborations with artists. A lot of stuff to talk about, I think. So we're looking forward to that one. Need to decide what to drink, because we're not doing water every time, I'm telling you.
It wasn't just my idea. I didn't have to sell that too hard.
So I hope you'll join us then.
We're looking forward to it. Thank you very much for watching and listening. This has been Meat and Poison.
Goodbye.
Bye.